Hello and welcome everyone to the afternoon keynote. My name is Kate Merlene from Cuyahoga County Public Library, and I am so thrilled to be moderating this session with Deborah Harkness, who has just announced her summer book tour. So hopefully she'll be stopping near a city near you, but we librarians are so lucky to get her absolutely first. So we'll be discussing The Blackbird Oracle, the fifth book in her best-selling, fan-loving All Souls series, which publishes July 16th from Ballantine Books. And I can tell you readers are going to be over the moon with this one. And I'm just delighted to welcome Deborah Harkness to talk about it.
Hi, Kate.
Hi, Deb. So glad you're here with us. And I said we're just lucky to have you as librarians here.
Well, I'm just thrilled that my first official event for this book is with all of you, because I know how much the librarians do to put this book out in front of readers, and I know how long those waiting lists can get. And so I just want to thank everybody for what they've done to get people to this book and to get this book into people's hands. So thanks, big thanks from me.
Awesome. Well, let's just dive right into the new book, because so The Blackbird Oracle is set 4 years after the events of your previous book, Times Convert, and it's on the cusp of Diana and Matthew's twins' 7th birthday. So can you set the stage for us for what readers can expect in this book and why you chose to return to Diana and Matthew at this point in their story?
Great question. I really think that this was in many ways driven by where the twins were in their life, Becca and Pip, or Rebecca and Philip. Because 7, as we know from the previous books, if we've read them, is a very special time in the development of a witch. And when I realized that, sort of 4 years after, they'd be 7, what would that trigger in Diana about her time as a 7-year-old? What would that actually mean for the children and their development? You know, when we last checked in with them, they were toddlers. But I also thought it was a great moment for Diana and Matthew because they're 7 years into parenting. And as many of the people listening to me know, relationships change over time with new stresses. And so this gave me a chance to jump back in and for us to check in, you know, where are Diana and Matthew right now? Diana's just hit the big 4-0, and you know, what does that do to your life? I know that when I hit 40, I was thrilled because I thought my best years were still to come, and I couldn't wait to dive into those years. But you know, it can still be a challenging time when you kind of think, wow, what do I want to do for the second half of my life, for my second act? And so all the planets aligned, and that's why I chose this moment.
Oh, that's great. And it just offers such a window into that next phase of the character's life. And then speaking of characters, so if you've read the series for a long time, I think people will be delighted to know that many familiar faces show up in this novel also. But we also get to meet a whole host of new characters, which is great, including several of Diana's kind of extended family, we'll say. How did those characters come alive for you? And did you have a favorite new character to write?
Well, I love a character. I love a new character. I love a character who appears unexpectedly, as Gallowglass did, as Hamish did. My favorite character in this book to write, it kind of shifted around a little bit, but finally, it's a character who is dead, and who therefore appears as a ghost. And it is someone named Granny Dorcas. And I'm 59 now, so now I'm looking forward to the elder years of my life. And I think I'm bonding with very eccentric grandmotherly types. That's what I want. That's what I'm going to lean into. And so she was just so amazing to write. She's my one of my new favorites from this book.
I'm so glad you said that, because she's one of my favorite new characters to read too. She's just amazing. And yeah, so Ghost too. You know, I love the fact that your character's dead. It's very Shakespearean, which I'm sure is no accident on your part.
Yes. Yes,
absolutely.
we love a good ghost. A ghost is a great way to bring in backstory, A ghost is a wonderful way to bring in history and also to make a person from the past, in this case, one of Diana's ancestors, be able to come alive on the page so that she's not just looking at a photo or reading a letter, but is actually able to interact. And I don't know about you, but for me, I love the idea that maybe somehow I could talk to, we were talking about Cuyahoga County, one of my ancestors who lived in that part of the world, and to ask, the Burkharts and the Thraps, what they, what their life was like. So it's a really neat opportunity for me as a historian as well as a writer.
Absolutely. And just that connection with your ancestors and the pieces of the past that you might be missing. And in fact, like up to this point, we as the readers kind of forgot about Diana's other part of her family, like those Proctors, which, coming out of the woodwork at this point. So did you have this all fleshed out ahead of time, like kind of just at the ready, or did that come later in the process?
That's a great question. I know an awful lot about my characters and their backstories. And as a historian, those backstories go far back, centuries, sometimes millennia, in the case of someone like Isabeau or Philippe. And I do have them sketched out. When I focus on an aspect, like, my joke name for this book was Meet the Proctors, because it really was about this huge plot hole that I put in the first 3 books in the series. And that very few, because we were all having so much fun with the bishops and the de Clermonts, only a very few readers ever said, but what about the Proctors? And I thought, oh, good. They're thinking like me as a historian. They're looking at this space and thinking, it's like making a puzzle and thinking, what are the pieces that go in that hole? And so for me, I've been playing around with the Proctors and the family tree. And of course, as all librarians know, John Proctor, the Crucible, every probable 10th grader in America at some point reads the Crucible, or a high school student. And so it's a figure and a lineage that, people may not have ever heard of the bishops, but probably if you said John Proctor, Salem witches, people go, oh yeah, that thing I had to read in high school. And so it was really fun for me to be doing all along research on the Proctor family, where they came from, on the Salem trials. I knew I always wanted to tell this part of the story, but the magic part for me is I never know exactly how. And so there's all these notes and things on my shelves waiting for the moment when I can finally say, oh, that's how I can tell that part of the story.
It's almost like magic, isn't it?
It is. I mean, the author of The Little Prince once said that all the stories in the world are out in the air. And you just have, what a writer does is has to catch one of them and sort of channel them. And I think about that a lot.
So I want to talk about Diana, and you mentioned, she turned, a new part of her life, and you explore the idea of different crossroads and like the paths and choices that Diana has to make, really to embrace like the full expression of her power, which includes everything. But she also has to consider, Matthew and the children and the life they've built together. Can you talk a little bit about that tension?
Yeah. When I was about Diana's age in this book, I did a very strange and wonderful thing, which was I started writing a novel that became a discovery of witches. And I remember how strange it was for lots of people. Why did I need to do this? Wasn't I happy being a historian? Was I quitting academia? Not so far, guys, is the answer. And it was amazing to me because I did feel like I was at a crossroads, but that it was a crossroads where it made sense that even though the roads sort of seemed like they split, they were still sort of headed in the same direction. And for me, I think all of us face those moments where we are presented with an opportunity, or we get a challenge, whether it's a health challenge, whether it's a family challenge, an employment challenge, where we're asked to make a decision, and how we come to that decision. Everybody has lots of input about what you should do, and well, you're going to do this, and obviously the children are most important. And where do you make space for yourself to decide what's really going to be best for you? It's like being on an aircraft and being told to put your oxygen mask on first, because ultimately, if you don't do that, then none of the decisions you're making for other people are necessarily going to work. And I thought that was a really great thing to focus on. Again, we're coming out of a global pandemic in which there were a lot of us who were challenged in various ways. And I'm sure that a lot of people had difficult decisions to make. So I really wanted to delve into that with Diana, who seems, to have it made in the shade, but nobody does. Everybody's got a story, no matter how it looks like they're put together or not.
Right. No, and I just love that. And the setting that you have is so integral to her growth as a character. It's set in Ravenswood, at the Proctor estate. And I'm curious if Ravenswood is based on any particular place, and why is that like a perfect place for her to continue her journey?
Well, it is based on a real place, because as many of my readers know, I don't make up anything if I don't have to. I like to embroider the truth, but I prefer to do that. So for those of you who are New England librarians, you can send yourself or your readers to Greenwood Farm in Ipswich, Massachusetts, which is actually open to the public. You can't go inside the house, but you can walk around it. It is exactly as described, if you want a little prequel of where the action for the book takes place. And it is protected by the trustees of reservations for the state of Massachusetts. It's a nature preserve. And it is a perfectly preserved 17th century house in its original context, surrounded by salt marsh and meadow. And it is, when I came over the hill at Greenwood Farm and looked down on it, I literally sat right down on the ground, and I couldn't believe it. I felt like I had been actually dropped back in time. It's connected to a very famous house called the Crane Estate, which is incidentally where they filmed The Witches of Eastwick. And just off of Crane Estate is something called Choate Island, and that's where they filmed The Crucible. So I feel like all the stars aligned, but it really tickles me that people can go and take a picnic and walk around this very beautiful part of Massachusetts and feel what I felt when I went to Ravenswood, because I think if you go there, you will be struck by how out of time and space it feels. And I'm getting goosebumps just talking about it. And so for me, I just had to describe what I myself experienced. And this is what I think is, always a really fun moment for me, whether it's Prague or the Bodleian Library or 16th century London. Somehow being able to really evoke a place like that is just really important part of my process.
That's amazing. And I think they're going to be having a lot more tourists now.
Great, because as we know, there's huge funding cutbacks. This is no news to librarians from governments, and a lot of the trustees for the reservations staff have been let go recently. There's limited hours. They actually used to have Greenwood Farm open to the public, but funding cuts meant that they could no longer do that and keep the house safe because they couldn't staff it. So I say, let's save Greenwood Farm. Let's all go to Greenwood Farm and write to the trustees and say, please open this amazing national treasure and see where we get it. Wouldn't that be a great legacy for all of us to leave, that we saved this piece of Massachusetts history? That would be awesome.
Awesome. And librarians know how to get this stuff done. So
exactly. Trust a librarian. Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I wanted to talk kind of just about the experience of reading the book, because when I was going through this, I was just there, and it reminded me of reading the other books in the series, of just how many pleasures there are reading a novel that feels like a complete sensory experience. I mean, you have taste, you have smell, you have textures there. It just makes what's happening so visceral. I'm curious, why are these sensory details just so important to the storytelling of this particular series? And just how do you balance these details so masterfully while keeping things moving?
Well, that's very kind of you. Not everyone agrees that I balance these so masterfully. But for the people who are readers like me who like to get immersed in a book, I think that does all the sensory details that a more plot-focused reader might find extraneous are just add to the experience of the book. And I think that's, you said the magic word, the experience of reading. I don't read a book to actually get from the beginning to the end. I read the book for the wander in the middle. When I get into a book, I want to stay there and curl up and really know it and feel like I'm there. And when I finish it, I want to feel a little bit disorientated, like when you come back from a vacation and you think, wait a minute, where is everything? Even though it's your house, you've disconnected from your real world. I think we really need places and spaces like that in our lives. Life is very challenging. It's very stressful. It's very uncertain. And being able to have those places where you feel like you can take a little mini vacation from your own life and your own world is really important to me. And my mother, when I was a little girl, she used to talk about she's British, and she used to talk about her first trip to Paris in her teens. And she said she could still remember the smell of the croissants baking in the morning in Paris. And that has stuck with me my whole life. Whenever I go to a new place, I smell, I taste, I touch. And it's a way for me to interact with the world. And then obviously, when I started writing, I just kind of transmuted that into prose as best I could. And I guess I never even realized that other people don't experience the world that way. So yeah, it's a treat for me to do.
That's amazing. And it just comes through in the book. Speaking of food and beverages, so like readers of the series will know that, beverages are very important to witches and vampires. Definitely. So for me, I think if Discovery of the Witches is wine, then the Blackbird Oracle might be tea. So how fun is it to infuse that language of aroma and taste into that writing? And do you have a favorite tea? Do you have a tea ritual? Let's talk about the tea in the book.
All of these things. Diana is a tea girl in a coffee world. And so we finally solved the mystery of where does she get her taste for tea in this book. The answer is the Proctor family. And so it was a joy. I've actually recently started blending teas. I am a big fan of Adagio Teas, which is an American company. And I started on something called their Tea of the Month, the Tea of the Community, which is a tea bag, a bag of loose leaf tea for every single day of a month. And you kind of go on and you can go online and talk to other people who are drinking it and lead a review. I come from a background in wine, and I don't drink as much anymore. And so I've loved being able to apply my wine sommelier sort of techniques to tea and go on that journey. So now, I can talk oolong, and I can talk rooibos, and I can talk honeybush versus rooibos and all those kinds of good things. And I've really enjoyed just the process of exploring how to blend the teas. And one of the teas I think that really sort of that got me kicked off on this is something, I think it's called Big Sur from Art of Tea or California Coast or something like that. And it's Earl Grey and a little bit of vanilla and some mint. And that pretty much blew my tea sense of what tea could be out into the stratosphere. And I've been following it up ever since. But yeah, if anybody wants to check out my tea blending skills, they can go on Adagio and check them out. I've got teas for the characters. Matthew's is extremely clove spicy. You said you wanted to know what a vampire smelled like. That's it. But they're kind of fun, and most of the proceeds go to charities, including Diana's tea goes to the American Historical Association, and some of them go to the Bodleian. So this is all a good thing.
Wow. So amazing on all counts there. So tea lovers, you know where to go now.
Yes. Tea.
Yes, yes. So put your questions in the Q&A box. We'll try and get to them as best we can. A couple of more for you. So I want to talk about just the research, and as a scholar, you're really well known for the immense knowledge that you bring to the world. Can you just briefly tell us what your research process was like for this book and what was the most fascinating thing that you discovered?
Okay. Wow. Well, there were a couple of unexpected bumps in the road. My research for this really started as an educator. I teach a course on queens, witches, and courtesans, and 1/3 of the course is about Salem and other witch trials. So I've been obviously reading up, and I know the literature, and I know the different kinds of, the scholarship on these subjects, as well as the primary sources. And so that kind of provided the backbone. My hat is always off to anyone who approaches a subject without any kind of historical background and writes a historical fiction element or book. I don't know how they do it, because it takes all of my skill set to navigate this. It is very challenging, and there are a lot of people who do it extremely well. And I think that for me, what was interesting was getting really into the Salem archives themselves and reading the primary sources. I knew a lot of secondary scholarship and some of the primary sources. And of course, I knew the Crucible quite well. But really getting into those sources, I started operating like a historian and bothering my friends who were early Americanists and saying, did you know that one of the accused women was married to a 7-foot tall man, which would be a giant even today, but in those days when the average height for a man was 5'6"? And do you think that played a role in her accusation? Or this person, John Proctor had a brass sundial. How many brass sundials were in early Massachusetts? And did his interest in sort of science and the heavens have any impact? So questions that I didn't see other historians actually asking makes me now want to write a book about Salem. But I guess this is it. This is my book about Salem. Don't worry, I'm not going to go off and write a scholarly work. And just going to the places that were associated with it and really doing the research meant that I saw a different side of Salem than had ever been presented to me reading other scholarship, or certainly as a student who read the Crucible. And it's so complicated. And it's such a story about what happens when a community turns on itself.
Yes.
And looks to assess blame. And we throw the word witch hunt around like it's nothing these days. But let me tell you, it's, when a community self-combusts in that way and starts killing its own, it's a moment that has a lot, I think, to teach us today about how important community is and how important it is to preserve it. So that was, I think, one of my many big surprises. There were a lot of them, but that's probably was the biggest, was to really, really focus on that community piece.
Wow. Yeah. And so before we go, I want to definitely mention the TV series adaptation of A Discovery Witches, which has brought like a whole new generation of fans who've discovered the series. And I know you're involved as an executive producer. And actually, Pearl has asked, has there been any interest in turning book 4 or 5 into a TV show?
Yes, there has been, but I'd rather write books for you all. So at the moment, there are no plans to make any more television. It's quite time consuming for me in order to do it well and produce something that I think is worthy of the readership. And I have to make, it's one of those crossroads. Do I make you TV or do I make you books? And I feel like the books are closer to my heart, and I'm focused on that for right now. But we'll see. You never know. You never know what might happen.
Yeah, and how was that experience producing? Did seeing your work translated to the screen change anything about the writing of the books for you? Or
yes, I hear the cast members when I write dialogue. So
Wow.
before it just had a generic voice, but now if I'm writing Sarah, it's Alex Kingston's voice. If I'm writing Matthew, I hear Matthew Good. If I am writing Diana, who was the focus of this book, Teresa Palmer was, my constant earworm. Everything I wrote, I was filtering through her voice and imagining her saying it. So that's been a really fun part of this new experience for me.
That's amazing. And it speaks to just the perfect casting that
Yeah.
you had.
Amazing cast. Owe them so much.
So I'm just curious, now that you've been writing these characters for so long, and I'm sure thinking about them for much longer, over the course of many books and years, do you have a sense of when it's going to feel complete to you? I know we'll want more, no matter what you give us, but do you have a perfect ending in mind?
I do have an ending in mind. I don't know if we'll ever get there. But I'm just kind of in there pitching. I have so many stories. Like we alluded to before, all of these backstories, but also the forward stories. I mean, the twins are 7. What happens when the teens hit puberty? I don't know. Hormonal teenage witches sound kind of interesting to me, especially since Matthew's such a control freak. And what happens when they go off and they have their own professional lives? So I'm just really looking forward to telling some of those stories and getting them out there. And we'll see how close we get to my end, or whether, hopefully when I'm a, knock on wood, doddering 90-year-old, I will just sort of release a statement that says, this is what happens at the end, so that I could get everybody a sense of resolution. But I think, I don't know, they're not ready to be quiet quite yet. So I think sadly or happily, you're going to all have a few more books that you have to get through before we get there.
Well, I think we'll happily take that news.
Oh, thanks, Kate.
So in the meantime, Heather asks, are you planning to write a cookbook with all this talk of tea?
Wow. One of my amazing readers has actually done a cookbook, a little cookbook, and she has a Facebook page. It's called, I think, Cooking for All Souls. So you can get on Facebook and search for it. She has done an amazing job recreating things like, Matthew's date supper for Diana, the chicken Normandy, and all the looking up the historical recipes. So, Dandy, if you're out there, there's more food coming at you with a very definite New England lean. So let's all be clam bakes and lobster boils. Here we come.
And just real quick, I know Kara's talking for everybody when she asks, is Gallowglass talking to you yet?
Oh, yes. Gallowglass is chatting away, and the many, many interesting people in Gallowglass's life. So Matthew's talking louder right now. So I anticipate that you're all going to get a bit more Matthew before you get Gallowglass. But Gallowglass is definitely right there in the batter's box and ready. So yeah, and I've already finished a first draft of the next book. So hopefully we'll be able to share that with you in very due course. So we're cranking along.
Oh, that's awesome. And I speak for Karen and all of us. We say, woohoo.
Oh, thanks. And thanks to everyone again for being so kind to my imaginary friends and my readers. It really means the world to me.
Yes. And thank you so much, Deb, for being with us. Thank you, everyone, all the librarians for being here. We really appreciate you. Next up, we have a couple of great panels. We have Myth, Magic, and more to keep on the theme. And then we also have an excellent teen book tasting. So just enjoy the rest of your festival.
Thank you, Kate. This was an amazing chat. You got us kicked off beautifully. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.